Thank everyone. And so our panel is simplifying operations and registrations. And what it is basically is an opportunity for you to get a broad picture or a fuller picture on registrations outside the United States. Obviously, a lot of you folks are probably mostly familiar with the FAA and the FAA registry. And so what we're going to do is have two very well-known experts in the field of registrations. We have Simon Williams, the Director of Civil Aviation for the Isle of Man Registry, and to his right, Alexandra Kalindris, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Registry of Aruba. I'm David Hernandez, a shareholder at Vedder Price, and I'm just here and going to guide them along. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about where this remote is. Okay, there we go. Yeah. It's over there. There we go. So, what we're going to discuss. Why is everything so complicated? And does more regulations make things safer? Two very good questions. First, Alex and Simon, why don't you just tell me what's the role of registry, given that you two are both in very, not say very different, but very unique parts of the registry world. And just tell the audience what you do or what your registry does.
So I guess the basic role of registry is like a location where the aircraft is registered in, or a country, a jurisdiction where the aircraft is registered. So on the basic layman terms, that's what the role of a registry does. But then also they enforce the regulations per that jurisdiction. They make sure that the asset is safeguarded. They validate the facilities, the pilots, everything that comes along with the aircraft operations.
Simon?
Yeah, that pretty much covers it really. My role is one of registrar, first of all, and then aviation safety regulator thereafter. And there's a whole host of ICAO-based activity that comes out of that, which is based on the standards and recommended practices.
Got it. And so, again, given that most folks, I think, are most familiar with the FAA registry, how do you compare yourselves to the FAA registry, given that the FAA registry is a owner registry, as opposed to, say, an operator registry? Alex?
I don't think we really compare ourselves to the FAA registry because we can't really compete or compare with them. They're kind of a different beast. I think we look up to them as a jurisdiction that they are, but we have our own independent regulations and rules that we follow and that we stand by. And I think Aruba has a very good relationship with the FAA, so we respect a lot of the inspectors and the things that come out. We keep a lot of tabs on the new things that the FAA is doing because of the proximity that Aruba has to the FAA and because of the relationship that it's had for almost over 20 years now. But I don't think we compare ourselves to them. I think that we operate in a very different way, especially our organization, since we are a private-public organization. For those of you that might not be familiar with Aruba, so we are, and I mean myself and my team, we are the private organization that manages the Registry of Aruba in connection with the Department of Civil Aviation. So we operate very differently than the FAA, which is a fully government entity.
Simon? Yeah.
I mean, I think basically the registries, all regulators really ideally should be part of the global safety regulatory network. And ideally what we're trying to achieve is a level playing field for business aviation. Those that know me know that I'm a passionate advocate of this industry, and I know how important it is that there's a level playing field in terms of regulation. So I think it's beholden on the regulators to ensure that everything that we do achieves that end. Ultimately, for the Isle of Man Aircraft Registry, we're an ICAO, we're an international register, so everything we do falls out of ICAO SARPs. And to a greater or lesser degree, a lot of that applies as far as the FAA is concerned as well. There are some differences, but you know that's the nature of the beast, I think.
Got it. And so, I guess looking at the first and second bullets, the government versus privately operated, and then the registration process. Simon, could you speak to, the regulator? Are you a regulator? Is that your primary role?
Yes, absolutely. Primarily, I'm here to register an aircraft, and then thereafter, I'm a safety regulator. But I think there's a way of approaching this business, and ultimately, I just want business aviation to thrive, to be able to operate safely and efficiently. And I'm sure, my colleague to the right would say the same thing. I think it's a mindset in terms of how you approach that. So for me, the thing that I'm passionate about is something that I would call safety partnership. So actually, in some instances, some of the expertise, a lot of the expertise might actually sit with industry. And so what I don't want to do is end up in a situation where I'm sitting in some ivory tower issuing edicts completely uncaring about the effect that it has on industry. So it's about working in safety partnership with the industry that ultimately keeps me in a job. So I want to see it survive and do well. We are different from Aruba and others. That doesn't particularly matter per se. I sit within a government organization, but we operate a very business-minded approach to how we operate and carry out our role as safety regulators. Otherwise, here we are in our second decade of operation. The MIC register would simply not have been as successful as it is now. And I think, that's where all of the offshore registries perhaps have a bit of an edge without being too competitive over some of the legacy national state regulators, in that a lot of the balance of what we do and what these guys try and do is about being customer focused. Okay, we really want to help you. We want to help you achieve high levels of compliance so that you can just get on with your business safely and efficiently.
Got it, thank you. And so, Alex, same question. Are you the regulator? And if not, who performs that role?
So no, as I mentioned earlier, we're the private entity that kind of works with the government entity. So I myself am not the regulator, and I don't want to claim to be. I think the way that we operate is that we're the bridge between the regulating entity that we work with and the client and our operators to make sure that there's smooth communication, customer focus. I know some people in this room know for a fact that they have access to our phone numbers, to our personal emails, clients can call us at any time of the day. That's something that we offer that can kind of be difficult for some government entities. The other thing that's important, I think, with our role is that we don't try to pretend to be the regulators either. We make sure to keep both parties in mind, and we definitely enforce the rules of the DCA, but we ourselves don't make those decisions. So it makes it easier in that sense so that we can kind of understand the client and find different ways to comply for them that can work within the rules of the DCA.
Got it, thank you. So next, could both of you talk to your role in the operating process with both either commercial operations or private operations? Simon, I'll go with you because you don't have commercial operations on your registry, correct?
Hello? I've been hacked again. Okay, that's working good. So the aircraft registry was founded on private/corporate operations, and we still operate within that space. There are a number of reasons why that continues to be the case, although I'm always keeping the option of moving to AOC ops under review. It's quite a big step if you think about it, going fully commercial. That's a step change in terms of the operation, and at the heart of that, the fundamental tenet is protection of the fare-paying passenger, and it's a responsibility that needs to be taken very seriously. But no, we still operate in the private/corporate space. The registration process really is, I think, in both instances, very straightforward. It's not rocket science, and we have a flow diagram that you can just follow through. There's a number of gates on the way, the qualifying ownership criteria, those sorts of things, but it's really straightforward. I think in a bid to try and help, where we've seen things go wrong is, and I'm not attributing blame to anyone, certainly not the fine legal profession. The A to B of a business jet transaction seems to be getting increasingly long-winded and complex. And I think where we've seen things get a little unstitched is people think about the registration part of it right at the very end. and we'll get a frantic phone call saying, well, the owner wants to operate the aircraft in 10 days' time, and we haven't even started, or a week's time. So I would encourage engagement with the registries at the earliest possible opportunity, because we can help. A lot of this isn't rocket science.
Likewise, definitely I think it's important to understand what a registry does and understand our role, and to discuss it early on, because you can avoid a lot of hurdles. You can avoid buying the wrong aircraft depending on where you want it to be operated. I think Aruba sometimes operates in that realm, because we'll get a lot of clients that want to operate in the FAA, and they got bad brokerage deal, and unfortunately the aircraft is type rated for EASA. So we definitely encourage clients to kind of become much more knowledgeable about what it is that we do, and understand the role that we can facilitate, and we're here to help. Like, I think people look at registries as just purely regulators, and that we are just by the book, and that we cannot be flexible and kind of help you find ways to go around your situations, and that's not the case at all. There's many ways and many different ways to comply that still keeps you safe and operating.
Got it. So, I mean, the Aruba Registry has a commercial function. Question to both of you: do you think that's more complicated? Does it make your life more difficult to handle the commercial aspects of it, having all the AOCs on there? And by contrast, Simon, do you think it's a competitive disadvantage not having the ability to issue AOCs?
Well, I think it's a theme that we've heard already throughout the conference is, if you're going to operate in a particular space, you just identify what the risks are, and then you mitigate appropriately. So I've got a very clear path through to what I would need to put in place to be able to operate on an AOC or support AOC operations. And ICAO is pretty clear about what would be required in that regard. And so, we would just set that up and deal with it accordingly. But, just to endorse what, the comment that's been made, we can be flexible. And I think, again, this is where the offshore registries do offer an alternative. And I would beseech the audience to just think about the alternatives. We're all, as human beings, we're all very keen to operate within our comfort zones, and we have a system that we're familiar with. And I get that, and it has merit. But I would also say that if you do what you've always done, you're going to keep getting the same old thing. So, we can ensure that you comply with ICAO SARPs and operate very safely and efficiently, relatively easily. And I'd like to give one example, if I may. ICAO talks about the need for a certificate of airworthiness certificate to be in original form. But ICAO doesn't talk about what form that has to take. So traditionally, it's on a piece of paper that you then have to use FedEx or someone to send around the country or around the world. So that seems to me to be some sort of madness. So, one of the first things we did when I arrived was to say, well, find me a reason why we can't go completely digital. And we've done that. And there's no reason why you couldn't do that. Now, what that means then is that business aviation can get on with business a lot quicker. So it's an example of hopefully a flexible mindset that Alex was referring to, where we can understand what the issue is and we can find a safe, sensible, efficient way to address it so that you guys can just get on.
And so, Alex, on the commercial aspect, do you think it's more of is it problematic at all, dealing with AOCs?
No, I don't think it's more problematic. I think it's definitely more of an undertaking. There's more resources involved and there's more oversight, but it's not problematic. I think it's all in how your regulations are laid out, how well your internal procedures are, likewise how the procedures are for the clients to understand. So I think if you have everything internally and externally laid out in a way that's easy to digest for everyone, there's no need for it to be a huge undertaking or huge burden on either the operator or the authority. And again, it's also knowing your customer, knowing if they're capable of that type of operation, because there's customers that come to us all the time wanting to establish an AOC, and you just know that they don't have that capacity. So it's also like having that initial meeting, making sure during that initial meeting that you kind of flesh out all the details and really get a good understanding of how that operation is going to actually work in practice. And I think that initial meeting is your launch off. So if in that meeting you kind of realize that they're just not a right fit, you kind of need to let them know right off the bat to not continue. because it will be a horrible undertaking if they're not prepared and if they're not an organization that knows what they're doing and is qualified to handle a commercial operation. So it can be, but it doesn't need to be.
Got it.
I agree entirely with the comment that you've got to know what you're getting into, and we've had some people who have left us to go AOC and then come back because they clearly hadn't prepared properly for it, they hadn't thought it through, they hadn't appreciated actually in some instances the costs associated with it and the resources that were required, and that they were going to struggle to reach the standard that was needed wherever it happened to be. Honestly, I can understand the drivers from an economic point of view, and I know business aviation is constantly under pressure, but going charter isn't necessarily the solution for everyone. And so that's got to be part of the thought process is, I see some appeals or I can see some good ideas associated with this, but actually, is it actually right for me?
So I'm going to talk about the personal function and surveillance and audits. And one thing I've noticed working with both registries is how easy it is to get you guys on the phone. You call up and, Simon, you actually call up and you speak to people, as opposed to the FAA where you're never going to speak to anybody of relevance on the first call. It takes many, many calls and waiting and all that stuff. So if you could, describe your staffing, the personnel functions, and what role do they play in surveillance and audits? Alex?
So I'll kind of explain both of our offices. So my office in particular is kind of the administrative office. So we've broken it down where we have project managers assigned to specific operators, and they kind of oversee every aspect of the registration for the life of the aircraft on the registry. And then we also have kind of the more regulatory aspect, which is the DCA, and also our designated inspectors that are based all over the world that kind of oversee the C of A inspections if there's an audit on a facility that needs to be done, if there's an audit on an AOC operator that needs to be done. So we have kind of multiple different branches that all interact with each other. And usually the project manager is the one that kind of connects all the dots between the DCA, the operator, and the inspectors.
Got it. Okay.
So we all live in the same office down at the airport in the Isle of Man. That works well from my perspective because one of the things I'm passionate about is standardization and good communication between the team. We have the functional areas that you'd expect, so we have airworthiness, flight operations, and then that revolves around a central team of registry services officers, and they're really the hub. So it makes that side of it very straightforward and efficient. Of course, I don't have the same load because we focus, as we've already said, on the private side, so I just operate in that niche space, so I don't have the additional considerations. Cost is important. And as Alex has already alluded to, so we operate on a similar model in that we have airworthiness inspectors around the globe because a business class ticket across the pond is not cheap, and if we can find a cheaper way of getting someone down to Savannah to do a survey, then we'll get one of our guys in the States to drive down and do it. So that makes sense. It's a lot easier. And of course then at the end of the C of A process, we'll email you your C of A so you don't have to wait for FedEx to turn up. Another aspect where regulatory bodies in this sort of space can help is that when I started, we would find typically on an airworthiness inspection that the pass rate was only about 45%, so pretty low. And in terms of managing your expectations and that of your clients, that's not a great place to be in because if you've got the C of A on the Friday and he wants to fly on a Saturday, we don't want to be in a 50-50 chance of that happening. So again, by working with industry and safety partnership, we've now got that pass rate up to low 90%. Now, that's not because we've diluted our standards. We keep them appropriately high, okay? But we work with industry. We have packs that we now produce before the survey itself. So we're trying to be really proactive in supporting industry so you have a high degree of confidence that your aircraft is going to be compliant and mostly safe, because that's where the accountability with me stops.
Got it. Okay, last bullet there, funding sources. You mentioned cost for both of you. Funding sources, and are you fully self-sufficient? Simon?
So I sit within the government. I'm not allowed to make a profit, believe it or not. That's the same way the UK CAA operates as well. So I have to cover my costs, so we recover those costs by levying appropriate charges on industry, but I'm not a profit centre. So that is, you might say, a constraint, but actually what it does is it frees me up completely. I have no pressure on me to earn a dollar. I've obviously got to try and deliver a safe product, which is a key thing, but it maintains the purity of the safety regulatory decision. I have no commercial pressure on me, so therefore I can make decisions based on safety alone and then adapt the rules to support business aviation to operate efficiently and safely.
Got it. Alex.
So the DCA's funding sources come from the government of Aruba, and then we have our own independent funding sources as the private branch, which gives us a lot of flexibility in the sense of if we want to kind of in-person meeting with clients, if we want to kind of innovate with technology, we're able to kind of support our own independent office as well as the DCA with all these kind of new tools. So having kind of the private funding source really allows for a lot of kind of room to have more in-personalized services for the clients.
Got it. Okay. So now that we have an idea of what's the role of the registry in the process of operations and regulation, I guess the question then is, why is everything so complicated? And I guess to start with, what is everything, and what does it mean by being complicated? So, do you think it's complicated?
Well, aviation by definition is complicated, and we were listening to some of the earlier presentations, and yeah, it is complicated, but it's a safety critical activity, so there needs to be a degree of complication, but it's about not making that everything so impossibly difficult that people just give up, because a ship's safe in harbour, but that's not what a ship is for. So we want aircraft to fly, and it's about how do we get them to the point where they can operate safely and efficiently. So the everything in our case, I think, is basically ICAO compliant registry and therefore thereafter operations.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's complicated. I would say I think it takes a good organization to stay organized and on top of the changes in the industry and the regulations that they're trying to comply with. So I don't think complicated is the right word. I think maybe it's there's a heavy load of paperwork initially, especially for a newer operator who might not be familiar with registration. It could seem overwhelming, but I think we do our best to kind of streamline the process, to kind of walk them through it so they don't feel overwhelmed or give up. And that's our role. Our role is to kind of guide you through it to make sure you don't believe that it's complicated, because I generally don't believe it is complicated. It's just understanding the regulation and your way of filling out the information that we need.
Got it. Okay. So, easy question for both of you. What are your priorities from a registry perspective?
Safety, keeping people safe, and keeping people flying. Because it's great safety, but it only matters if they're flying, because it doesn't matter if the aircraft is safe if it's on the ground.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm back to my ship and harbour analogy. We want aircraft to operate, but it's got to be safe.
So the next two bullets there, and this is always an interesting one. You hear complaints about registries, particularly the FAA, are so spread thin. It takes so long to get things done. Although I will say they're speeding up. They've now introduced digital signatures or DocuSign, and it seems like there's less complaints from the FAA registry. But for both of you, how do you deal with or avoid complaints about scarcity of resources, just lack of personal service? Simon?
Well, the honest answer is, I think in 2014, it's fair to say that the Isle of Man was struggling in this regard. Actually, we had a great product, and the demands upon the registry outstripped the resources and the systems that we had in place. So we worked very hard on that over the last 3 to 5 years, and as well as capping my activity in terms of private operations, that controls the amount of work or pressure upon us. But we're a completely different situation now, and going completely digital and other systems changes that we've made mean that we can operate a lot more efficiently. So unless someone wants to tell me different, I don't recognize the lack of resources issue right now, and we've got room for more.
Got it.
I definitely think embracing technology helps with scarcity of resources. The more technologically savvy, the more stuff that we accept digitally, definitely facilitates that. And I think understanding that, yes, we're regulators, but we don't need to act like police officers. And a great example of that is the need for a private operation to reading all their manuals. That's just an overload of responsibility that's not necessary, especially in a small private operation. So you can do a simple compliance form that doesn't take up our inspectors' time of reading and overlooking manuals, and you free them up to do other things. So I think it's just being innovative in the way that you comply with the regulation.
Got it. Okay, so we'll tackle the next two bullets together. Obviously, you're more of offshore registry, so I would assume the bulk of your transactions are international, cross-border deals, and with that, you have financing. Are there any unique challenges you deal with, given that cross-border environment and also folks that want to finance? Simon? Okay,
so we're 3 days hard ride into the country where I have no knowledge on these things. So I think, the Isle of Man is blessed with a real centre of excellence in terms of the industry that supports. And I think once we start to get into this sort of conversation, then I would definitely point people to specialist advisors.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
I don't think we've ever really faced any issues with financial constraints or any of the international operations. I think actually we seek after them. We kind of like complicated projects, and we enjoy kind of the difficult terrain. So we've never really had any issues. I think Aruba is a really reputable jurisdiction, so all the banks kind of know us and are comfortable working with us. So.
Got it. Okay. So I think this is our final fulsome slide here. No, we don't listen this time. That's fine. We don't listen. We just we freestyle until Al says stop. Does more regulation make things safer? So, for both of you, what's, I guess, purpose of regulations, and how do you know they work?
More regulations and more complicated regulations, of course, they don't make things safer. I think we've already alluded, both of us, to the role of the registry in terms of trying to help and guide people through. I call it facilitating high standards, working in safety partnership. So, I know what I'm like. If someone gives me a 700-page manual to read double-sided in size 10 font, I'm not going to read it, I'm afraid. So, it's about streamlining, it's about making it standardized, it's about, I think also, from my perspective, it's about being risk-based, it's performance-based. So you're not going to apply a rule set to a situation that it's just irrelevant to. There's no point, and that's just bureaucracy. So I think, increasingly the onus is on us as safety regulators to understand the rule set, but also to understand the risk that the operator may be facing, and then to apply an intelligent, imaginative, performance-based approach to that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that more regulation necessarily means that it's a safer operation. I think that more regulations can sometimes hinder productivity and hinder the industry. EASA kind of did it when it launched Part NCC. I think a lot of the smaller private operators were pretty impacted by Part NCC. So it doesn't necessarily mean that. With that said, I think aviation in itself needs regulations. We need to stay safe, and I think it's been applauded as a very safe industry. I think the healthcare industry follows the roadmap that the aviation industry has given them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to over-regulate, because I don't think that's good for anyone, neither the regulators nor the clients.
So it comes down to balance.
Okay. Yeah. So in terms of the actual process, rulemaking process, so the FAA does this notice of proposed rulemaking. They issue a final rule. People are allowed to comment. For each of your registries, could you discuss the rulemaking process to the extent you're involved in it and international considerations associated with your rulemaking?
Well, it's a very timely question, actually, as far as I'm concerned. So initially, when the Isle of Man Aircraft Registry was set up, it was predicated, or it was based on the UK registry. So we inherited the UK's air navigation order. So one of my main strategic goals we achieved last year. So we achieved royal assent from the UK. What does that mean? Basically, it means that the aviation legislative process is now repatriated. So to what degree am I involved in the rulemaking process? I'm writing them. So that's a great place to be. Now, that doesn't mean to say I'm going to go off on one and just make up a load of Mickey Mouse rules, but the cascade here is ICAO, SARPS, but then also it allows us to import best practice from around the world, whether it's FAA or whether it's from Europe or other places. So right now, although lawmaking, I mean no offence, lawmaking is a fairly dry activity, actually this is a fantastic opportunity because, you know, we've got a chance now to be in a really good springboard in this regard.
Okay.
Very similar to what Simon said. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you got to wait. You got to wait.
Trouble there.
Don't do it until you get the thumbs up. Quick question: is your registry, you consider it proactive or reactionary?
Extremely proactive.
Yeah, I would say proactive as well.
Okay. No one likes to talk about litigation, and sovereign immunity is kind of like litigation, so we won't talk about either one of those. Last question. So how can registries simplify operations and registrations? Simon, Alex, either one. Go.
I think I've alluded to this before, but I think technology is really the way to go. And also, it's good to kind of hear out your operators, understand what their difficulties are, understand like where their chokeholds are, like what is kind of giving them issues so that you can kind of grow and learn as a registry. And kind of, your whole purpose is to keep your fleet flying and safe. So it's always good to kind of talk to them and understand what their constraints are and what their goals are. So I think by speaking with your operators, by looking at industry standard, industry best practice, and technology, I think it's a good way to start.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for me the key is working in safety partnership. My team often think that I'm completely nuts when I look at them and say, I don't want battery hens, I want free-range chickens. And what I mean by that is I want them to use their imaginations to work out how they can best support industry so that when we talk to you, you talk to us, we can guide you through it. We both want the same thing.
Got it. All right, thank you. Questions? No? No questions? All right. All right. Thank you so much. No questions.